Hi, this is Bob Fitrakis, once again bringing you the other side of the news.
Death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Hi, here in the studio. And this also will be on WGRN 94.1, The Green Renaissance. Is that, I don't know why they got me looking over there, but I will. I'm here with Marilyn Howard, a good friend of mine. And again, she's the lead instructor, lead professor, African American Studies at Columbus State. We've known each other a long time, going back to the 1990s. And we've been down in the struggle together. And always, always a pleasure to have her in, particularly in the longest every 4 years Black History Month.
That's right.
Where you're picking up an extra day.
That's right. We're picking up an extra day.
So we got plenty of time to have you in the studio.
And I'm glad to be here. It's always a pleasure to be on the air with you.
And again, you are always reading something, writing. You write book reviews for the Free Press.
I do.
And what have you been reading lately?
Well, the most recent one I turned in is called What the Hell Do You Have to Lose?
The words of Donald Trump?
Yes, Trump's, and the subtitle is Trump's War on Civil Rights. This is by Juan Williams of Fox News. And basically what he said, he distills the African American freedom struggle down to about 6 broad categories. And he goes through, he gives a chapter to each one, and he goes through what it took to get to full rights and how the president is chipping away at that. So that was really very interesting. And I remember when he was at Columbus State, probably about 25 years ago, to help us celebrate Martin Luther King Day. The next one online is called Sweet Taste of Liberty, about a free black woman who was kidnapped into slavery. And she sued this man for reparations. She asked for $20,000. She got $2,500. But the point is that she sued him for back pay and loss of freedom and all these things. And this is a story that starts in Ohio.
Well, that's always a question because it comes up occasionally in Hollywood movies and in sort of nonfiction books. But how common was it for people to be kidnapped? I'm a free black person.
It was very common. We all know about Solomon North of 12 Years a Slave.
Right.
But along with this book is another book about 5 young men. They're like teenagers, and they too are kidnapped. These are free young men, and they are kidnapped and sold into slavery. So it was very common. The closer, particularly by the 1850s, the antebellum decade, it was really dangerous, and black people and their allies had to be very careful about how they proceeded here. So you were always in living fear of that, which meant that even if you were free black, you're still skating on thin ice. That freedom was very, very tenuous.
And after they outlawed the importation of slavery, which some on the far right call the word of God.
Yes.
God wrote that Constitution.
Yes.
In tongues of fire and said, 20 years from now, quit importing black slaves. But did the ships really stop?
No,
there's all sorts of
we
reports
talked about
of
that. Yeah, we talked about that in class today. Both my beginning African American history classes, which are all about slavery, and we're going through the Constitution and looking at parts of the Constitution that pertain specifically to African Americans. Well, my students said, "How do you know? How do you know they're talking about slaves? Because the word slaves plural, and slavery, those are not in the Constitution."
Yeah, like other people.
There are always these euphemisms. And
you mean the slaves?
Yeah, yes.
Other
and
people.
So we have to I have to help them tease out. Well, who are they talking about when they say somebody who escapes from labor and goes into another state? This whole flowery kind of 18th century language. How do we get that? How do we find out that those are slaves, or they're talking about slaves? So that's always a interesting and a fun class for me. So we talked about that this morning.
So the conclusion is the slave ships didn't stop in
No, they did
1808?
not. And the analogy...
They were acting unconstitutional.
The analogy I said is everyone in here who drives, has a car and drives, raise your hand. It's the whole class. I say keep your hand up if you never have exceeded the speed limit. And of course the hands all go down. Now, does that mean if we drive faster than the sign says, does that mean there is no such thing as a speed limit? Or does it mean we're not paying any attention to it at this particular time? So just as the international slave trade was cut off, people continue to do that. In fact, I think they found the last ship that they can connect to that. I think it was the Clotilde in Alabama last year.
And
so people continue.
roughly how long was it importing?
Ooh, I would say,
other people?
Yeah, I would say well up close to the Civil War, because there's money in that. There's money in that, and the danger factor. People like the buzz that they get, but part of this is, as you know, as a political scientist, part of this is about the thought pattern for the framers was that if you stop the international slave trade, slavery will die out. And as you well know from the little piece that Thomas Jefferson wrote that was cut and left on the cutting room floor, he wasn't criticizing slavery as an institution. He was criticizing the international slave trade. So there was an erroneous thought that if you stop that, then slavery itself would die out, and of course it did not.
And in fact, again, you began to do a variety of things. The dense packing just prior to the cutoff date. And of course, some of the slave owners may have engaged in their own breeding of future slave stock.
Yeah, that's and someone today asked in class, well, where do all these fair-skinned black people come from? And I said, well, that's really walking, talking example of miscegenation, which was illegal in all the states, but many white men did not follow the law, we can say. Yeah.
I know. Well, when the Union Army showed up at some of those farms, when you look at those old pictures from the Civil
Gone with
War
the Wind,
picture,
a favorite from our president.
yeah, you kind of look at them, and they're there to free the slaves, and who are all these white kids?
That's right.
And you realize they're what
Mary
we call
Chestnut,
mixed race.
Yeah, Mary Chestnut said in her diary, she said, every woman can identify her husband's progeny on the slave owner's children on every plantation but her own. Those, she thinks, just dropped from the clouds.
Uh-huh.
So it's no secret. And then, so coming up after that, I'm going to be looking at a book called Grace Will Lead Us Home. This is about the Charleston Church Massacre and the hard, inspiring road to forgiveness. And, one of the things that happened was when this young man was arraigned and then sentenced, people from the church, they went there and said, I forgive you. So for, a couple of months, there was a big thing back and forth. Are black people too easy to forgive, these kinds of things? But another thing is really what she's talking about is the aftermath. What happens? Some of these people leave the church. Some of the survivors, they get in arguments about money that was collected for the survivors but never got to them. There are two daughters who put up 2 tombstones at their mother's graves because they have competing ways they want their mothers to remember. So it's really about what's the aftermath. People think after all the cameras are gone and that sort of thing, what happens in the community and how does it heal? So that'll be the next one.
Okay, and
always reading.
Any lessons we can draw from the Charleston shooting? Other than be weary when a strange white guy comes into your prayer meeting.
And that is the thing, and I think it's a legitimate question. Do black people, as a general rule, forgive too easily? I mean, there are always, after every one of these incidents, for want of a better word, there are always these people, many of them very involved. And this was Mother Emanuel. This was the home church of African Americans. And he sat in a 1-hour Bible class. In fact, he said they were so nice to him, he almost couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And this is, Mother Emanuel, this is sacred. This is the African American church. And so I think that's a legitimate question. But it says something about, there are the usual platitudes. Well, we have to look at the South and see where we're still wanting and, those kinds of things. But I think this is going to be interesting in the sense that we don't really follow the survivors of these terrible incidents for very long. There's a point at which the camera's always there and then they're not. How are they healing? How's the community healing? How's the church doing? Those kinds of things.
So, yeah, the question of the post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yes.
what long-term effects, does it have on the community, on the church?
Exactly. And again, people always say, well, we hope this will help white people, ask the hard questions. Well, of course it does for maybe a week or so, but then after that, it's back to business as usual. But I think it's an interesting thesis that she has that's very different from anything else.
A lot of the core white people, particularly the Trump supporters, the hard question is, are they going to try and take away my guns?
Yes, of course.
Can I still meet in the Walmart parking lot and sell my gun to somebody off their meds?
And anytime there's an incident where a gunman is taken down by an armed patriot or armed citizen, it's like, see, we should have guns. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. So, that's all going to be in this book. And so it sounds like a really unusual premise. And I think I'm going to get a lot of joy out of reading this particular tome.
And you got the, why'd you bring this in?
Well, today,
Smith Act?
the House of Representatives, I understand, passed a bill today that has to do with classifying lynching as a federal crime. I think I haven't seen the bill, but that's what I got from the students who are always on their phones all the time. The House did that in the 1930s, and it goes over to the Senate and it dies. So there were people, I think 3 people who either didn't vote or abstained. And I think it'll take the usual pattern. It'll go over to the Senate, and there'll be all these people talking about federal overreach. And you might remember back in, I think, 2012 when the Senate apologized for never passing it.
What would be the overreach?
Well,
right?
this
the
is
life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, federal government, preamble, general welfare.
Look at you. Look at you go. We were just hitting on all cylinders today because we talked about all this in class today. And so what this is that I tell the students about an Ohio man, a black man in Ohio who was...
And let me tell them about WGRN 94.1 and Marilyn Howard, my guest on the Green Renaissance. Now tell us about this.
All right.
Did you say a band of white guys in Ohio? I'm already scared.
Okay, well, as you know, lynching was just not a Southern crime, and most of us, myself included,
and you are the expert
surprised at
here,
that.
right? Your dissertation
yes.
was on?
And the lynching of black men by white moms in Ohio. And people always say, in Ohio? And then when I say the title and they figure it, they always say, oh, well, nice to meet you. And they all walk away. So it's not something people want to talk about.
But also in Ohio, I mean,
Ohio's
we
the
were
North.
civilized about that in the sense that what if a white guy could vouch for you?
And that's part of the theory that I looked at. So Ohio's the first state that's carved out of the Northwest Ordinance. And Jefferson, same guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence and had his little favorite piece cut out, the Northwest Ordinance forbade slavery in any of those territories as they became states. And Ohio's the first one, is 1803, and the next one doesn't come until, I think it's Indiana, it doesn't come until 13 years later. But because Ohio bordered on Kentucky and Virginia, West Virginia at that particular time, of course slaves were, coming through. So there were these, I look at the period after Reconstruction, so really start about 1877, and where there are this is when lynching really takes off. It ceases to be capital punishment for capital crimes and becomes the preferred way of punishing black men just for being born black. And as I said, most researchers say that lynching happened in 48 of the 50 states. I'm sure it happened in all of them, and you just probably had a deadline or something to make and had to stop looking for Vermont.
I mean, they were looking to lynch in Idaho. They just couldn't find any black people.
Yeah, Chinese.
Montana.
They got the Chinese in Idaho. Who lives in Idaho? Where is it? But at any rate, there was a women's group white women's group. Jesse Ames was the person who coordinated that. And they were trying to make lynching a federal crime and to stop lynching in the South. And then, of course, there's the super badass Ida B. Wells, who is the first person who starts to gather empirical evidence of why black men are lynched. Now, the main Southern thing is it's because they had sex with white women. Ida B. Wells said they were being lynched because they dare to be more successful than white men. So one of her friends was lynched with 2 other guys, and it was because her friend had a grocery store that was successfully competing against a white-owned grocery store. So in 1896 in Ohio, there are several of these in a year's time. And so this state representative, Harry Smith, he's from Cleveland, and along with the great civil rights supporter and Judge Allian Turget, they get together and they write an anti-lynching law, and becomes the Smith Act, because as you know, usually the laws are written after whoever sponsors, the first name.
Was that a federal act?
This is the state act.
State act.
But
not to be mistaken for the federal Smith Act that put all the communists in jail.
Exactly. So this is a state, and Ohio's the first state, and other states.
So Ohio's the first state with an anti-lynching
and
act.
what this allows is that the victims of these lynchings and their families could sue the county governments. So a victim, or the victim's estate, which is what it is, because the victim's dead there, could sue for up to $1,000, and families could sue up to $5,000 in a lynching. And I've seen 2 cases where there were families who were given reparations for their lynched relatives. So he was very instrumental in that. And following the passage of that, we see other states starting to use that sort of as a guideline to make anti-lynching laws. But state laws and federal laws are something, very, very different. So I haven't seen what the House passed on today, but I will look at it this weekend. But I expect, if it's what I think it is, I think it's going to have the same fate that the ones in the 30s did. It's passed through the House, and then it'll get bogged down in the Senate, and they'll talk it to death or shred it to death or whatever.
And a lot of Marilyn's writings appear in the Free Press, including many of her book reviews. So we bring you the best in intellectual analysis.
We do indeed. So many books, so little time. So what are you up to?
What am I up to?
Yeah.
Because of you, I'm working on a white supremacy in Ohio. But Marilyn, most of my schedule in between my wife, Suzanne, and Marilyn is I'm very busy because
idle mind's the devil's workshop. That's what my mother used to say.
So that book's supposed to be coming out soon.
And aren't you commenting on the most recent impeachment?
I am indeed tomorrow, which is another thing you volunteered me for.
Hey,
I
do you
appreciate
know Bob
it.
Fitrakis? Somebody said you know Bob Fitrakis. Do you think you could get him to be on this panel with us? He'll do it.
And of course, and we're looking at it.
And it's sold out.
And
folks.
this is history, right? This is, and of course, Nixon. Johnson, who put in the recording system,
Yes.
got caught a few times saying the
did.
N-word.
Yes, he did.
Did he not?
He did.
And he also got caught saying, "We got a bunch of thugs together and we killed the M."
Yeah.
I was like, did you just admit to assassinating the
Yes.
president of South Vietnam
Yes, he did.
on your taping system?
Well, what did he say about the Kennedys in the Caribbean? It was like a Murder Incorporated. down
Murder
there.
Incorporated, yeah.
So you're working on that lynching panel?
Well,
And this will
impeachment
be
panel.
Impeachment panel. And I had a great difficulty convincing my students in class Tuesday that Richard Nixon was not impeached. And then it took me about 10 minutes before they understood that it is a 2-step process. All the House can do is develop the grounds upon which somebody can
They're
be
like the
impeached.
grand jury.
Yes, and then it goes over to...
And then they,
Yeah, remember when, who was it? Who was the Chief Justice when Clinton was up and he wore the robe with the gold things on it?
God, he was the
From
real
HMS
right.
Pinafore.
He was the real right wing who was anti-impeachment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
we
think
should be able to remember his name. That was the
we should.
famed Republican judge that used to scream at black people.
But so are
he
you
was
going to?
appointed by Reagan?
Yeah. Are you going to be talking about? Will there be time for like question and answer, or what's the format for this?
Chief Justice Rehnquist.
That's it, Rehnquist. So what's the format for this tomorrow?
Well, there's 4 speakers tomorrow, and a scholar on Johnson, Andrew Johnson.
And the students say Johnson. Which Johnson?
So Andrew Johnson, and then there'll be somebody presenting. I'll be presenting on Nixon, again, who wasn't impeached,
Yeah.
and then drawing comparisons between him and Trump. But one comparison is Nixon tried to cover it up. The other one is of
proud
course,
of everything.
Trump just doubled down and
He's so
hi,
proud.
yeah, I've been impeached.
Yeah.
Chinese ought to investigate him and do an investigation
he's
too.
so-
I mean,
he's
talk
so
about
proud.
doubling down. I'm
Yeah.
thinking,
So-
didn't he just commit another act of impeachment?
And as I said to Fritz, at least Nixon had the good grace to follow the advice of his fellow Republicans and get out of town. But not this guy. He pushes everything to the limit. So y'all be talking about that, and there'll be some speaking.
And we'll be
then
talking about
questions and
Clinton.
things
Yeah,
like that.
there'll be open panel and questioning. Goes from 8:30 to 1.
Oh, goodness. Is there going to be lunch?
Not that I know of, but symposiums should have
Should have
lunch.
something to eat.
Historically, if we go back to Plato, symposiums occurred after drinking and eating.
Yes, when people were more satisfied, so to speak. But you're going to be doing that tomorrow, and the tickets are sold out.
Sold out at $10 a head.
Yeah, they really?
Yeah.
You charged for them?
I didn't charge.
I didn't know that part. I didn't know that, but I knew that they were sold out.
I just sold the tickets I could get a hold of.
Yeah, okay.
I'm scalping them. They're up to $15 on the private market.
Not know
May
that
go
they
as
were-
high as
they were-
18.
I thought we were just using Eventbrite for crowd control or something. So, where's the money go to?
Hopefully Columbus State. I'm not pocketing any of it.
Don't touch it. Don't even touch. Don't touch a penny. Don't touch the bullets as a penny. So I think people are looking forward to that. And of course, you and I were in the same department together in social
For many
behavioral
years.
sciences, and I've been over in humanities now for about 10 years.
Doing history, you used to
Yes.
do social
I used
science.
to do, yeah. I used to.
And you may know that one of the things I'm going to touch on tomorrow is all the revelations that came out of Watergate. The real sort of value of Watergate was these things that came out that in the history of the Republic we had never dealt with, like COINTELPRO.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hi, the FBI is running a program to destroy civil rights movement, black power movement, anti-war white college students. They got
they're-
Gene Seberg committing suicide, who played Joan of Arc,
yes. Oh, it's terrible. I
releasing
remember that.
stuff that she's having sex with Black Panthers like Eldridge
And,
Cleaver.
and Inger Stevens, who was the white Swedish actor who married a black man, she ended up committing suicide too when it got out because she had tried to keep that covered up. And the FBI is fully complicit in some of that stuff.
So many of the things that were going on, and that's Noam Chomsky's thesis, is Watergate was bad, but that really was Nixon getting in trouble by spying on other elite white guys.
Yeah, this
But
is,
the real stuff that was going on, the intervention in Laos and Cambodia, and
trying
the
to kill
secret,
Castro. He outlasted all the presidents who tried to kill him.
and all of that came out as a result of Watergate and reporting.
There are 2 new books out about Watergate. One is is by Tom Brokaw, and the other one, actually there are 3. The second book is written by James Reston Jr. His father was the famous
Right.
Washington Post.
Absolutely.
Scotty Reston.
And he was on Nixon's enemies
Yes,
list.
he was indeed. And the third one is called Watergate Girl, and this is a female lawyer or law student or something who was on the committee.
As was
And
Hillary
Clinton.
Clinton.
Yes, she
on
was
the
when she was.
Judiciary
Yes,
Committee.
exactly. So it's a Watergate year here.
Okay, big year for Watergate, and time to wrap up. Marilyn Howard, thank you for being on the other side of the news.
Bob, thanks for asking me. Thanks for having me here.
All right.
Enjoyed myself as always.
Thanks.
Death and hatred
And we're out. Microphones are off.
All right.
We're still on camera, as you can see. The end credits rolls while we chat a little bit.
So if you're gonna do anything weird, do it now. So we can put
Which side?
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah.
The other side of the
Well, I
needle.
got
Fall in his lap.
Yeah.
You can reenact how you fell in my
This
lap.
guy's my witness. If somebody said, I'll give you $1 million if you could do that again, I couldn't do it.
I can imagine what your library's like.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And
I
this,
bet it's
you know what, this Bob, Bob's the big brother I don't have because all my brothers are younger. But Bob was the person who decided and who told me, you are a scholar. And I always thought of myself as, a teacher. I had this wonderful third grade teacher. Bob said to me, no, you're a scholar. You should write. And so he gave me the confidence to do that. I'm very grateful.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he
That's
did.
sweet.
Wonderful.
He did, yep. He sure did. And you remember how I contributed to your campaign when you were running? That was when I was an adjunct. I gave you a check for $25.
Yeah.
What'd you spend it on?
Pizza?
Yeah, probably that.
I was an adjunct and I was in graduate school.
Back then,
That
we
was
actually
big
mailed
money.
stuff. I mean, literally, George Boas would stay up all night
Yeah.
putting
Stuff
in
in
envelopes
envelopes.
and putting stamps on it.
Yeah,
So
no.
this would have been
Yeah,
19. I started full time.
92.
Yeah, I started full time in '93.
Yeah, I ran in 92.